Carolyn and Celeste and I welcome you to this call, this interaction. We've got some poll questions that Jim will put out there in a minute. But before I introduce Jim formally, I'd like to play a short video that he's responsible for putting together. Well, that's Jim Whiddon, who has multiple roles in his life currently. Jim was originally from Amarillo and was a member of the Corps, as you can probably tell, at A&M. He's also a graduate assistant coach at A&M basketball team. And he's also a certified financial planner. In addition, he holds a Master's of Science degree in financial services. Jim founded JWA Financial Group in Dallas. He served as CEO for 27 years before he merged his firm with another organization in 2013. He is a two-time recipient of the Aggie 100 Award from the Mays Center for Entrepreneurship, and his work has been quoted or seen in more than 350 publications and national media outlets, including Fortune magazine, the Wall Street Journal, CNBC. He's also been a Fox contributor. I've heard him interviewed on the radio just kind of randomly. It was an hour interview. It was very, very well done. He started the old school with instructions to the students to have 12 keys to professional success. In addition, he teaches financial planning at Texas A&M. Jim has written a book called The Old School Advantage, and maybe this is a kind of a reminder to be prepared and throw back to the old ways before we had Zoom technology to deal with. He's written several books, including The Old School Advantage. The Mentor, which was released 2 years ago. Very, very, very good book, taking the practical ideas that he put forth in the old school into a fiction about a student at A&M. I don't know, it's not A&M, it's a hidden school. We don't know which school it is. It's not named outright, but subtle hints. In addition to being a professor at A&M in the financial planning program, he also enjoys traveling, guitar, music, reading, sports, anything with a ball, he says. And he and his wife, who also happens to be an Aggie, are active teachers in their faith community and have 4 children from the Aggie classes 15, 19, 20, and 23. Could you have guessed? And we are so pleased with his book. We've bought this. We've gone through it with Jim. He's been a tremendous resource for us. And for the first 3 people that email us after the call, we will give you an autographed copy of Jim's book, which I think you'll find a tremendous tool. We refer to it constantly, and some of the things that Jim has shared with us, we also go back and look at very, very frequently. He's helped us become much more clear and provide additional clarity for our clients, most importantly. So Jim, before you start off, I know the title of what will your legacy be. I want to share a quick personal story that happened last night. Nobody on the call knows this is happening, but I wanted to let you know. My grandson is 9 years old, and his parents are both very, very, very bright, very active. They do a lot of things like skiing and traveling. And I was trying to find a legacy that I could provide to him. And I decided a few months ago to teach him chess. He picked it up immediately, and within 2 days was beating me. Yesterday afternoon, and his father is very, very bright and very effective at anything that have to do with math. So yesterday afternoon, my daughter texts me and says, Sam asked if he can take this chess class. Well played, Big Paw. So it was a great feeling, and I couldn't help but think about your presentation today and the impact of legacy in the many different ways that we can impact the next generation and even the generation after that. So with that, Jim, glad to have you here. Thanks for sharing with us.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. It's so good to be here. And, I was just thinking as you were narrating that video that we couldn't get the audio to work, I may actually replace the audio I have with your beautiful voice. I've always told you should have gone into broadcasting and love it so much. But all right, so Todd, as you mentioned, what will your legacy be? I'm excited to present this material to you. And as you mentioned, I've had an opportunity to consult with advisors since I sold my practice back in 2013. and the delightful opportunity and challenge to be here, what I call the center of the universe in College Station, Texas, where A&M is, and to try to get these young minds headed in the right direction. So it's a real privilege to be able to do that and to be with you here today as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing some thoughts that I think will at least be thought-provoking is my hope. All right, so let's see what we've got here. Rebecca, can you forward that first slide, or would you like to take that over? And I'll just say next when we need a next slide.
Sure.
I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just let you take over.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to do, I want to put a couple of poll questions out here that I think will be informative. So those should be coming up here in just a moment. I know we have probably the majority of our participants today are financial advisors or in some way advising on financial issues. And the first question is going to be, what percentage of US citizens do you think are using a financial advisor? What percentage of US citizens are using a financial advisor? No cheating. Give me a few seconds to answer there. All right, and our answer there, Rebecca?
Well, I promise I'm clicking share the results, but is it working?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
it's on the screen.
Well, the answer is 31%. Now, as a financial advisor, I think of that and think, oh my, 7 out of 10 people that I see are not using one. That is a built-in market. Second poll question I would put up there for you is, how much of Warren Buffett's wealth came after he reached traditional retirement age of 65? So how much of Warren Buffett's, I hope of the presentation, we'll be here in just a moment, is I'm going to give you what I refer to as 3 super client questions. In other words, they're transcending questions to clients that are going to bring out information that is going to be hugely not only valuable from a financial standpoint, but also from an emotional and relationship building standpoint. So I look forward to that in just a moment. But the first thing I want to do is talk about, and I know our slides will catch up with us, but talk about what a legacy entails. What is a legacy? I would suggest to you that treasure, so I call these the 3 T's plus people. So the first T is treasure. All right, that's the financial aspect that we're all involved with as financial advisor. The next T is time. So we just spent a week teaching the time value of money on a TI calculator in fundamentals of financial planning with my students at Texas A&M. But when I think of time, I also have this thing floating around in my head known as the time value of time. In other words, that being the most valuable thing that we possess, what is it that we could do with our time and our legacy that would pour into perhaps the next generation? So treasure, time, and then the third T is talents. What is it that we bring to the table? What is it that our clients bring to the table that, you know, maybe some things they've even forgotten they had? So treasure, time, talents, and then I said the last one was people. It's relationships. The fourth aspect of what is a legacy is relationships. So 3 T's and people: treasure, time, talents, and relationship. So if we think about treasure for just a moment, what do we use treasure for? Well, again, as a newfound professor, I'm big on giving our students things that they can remember. So when I think of treasure, I think of we are either going to use our treasure to live to give, to owe, or to grow. So we've either got expenses, we want to give to charitable causes, we've got bills we got to pay or debt we need to pay off, or we're trying to grow our portfolio. So treasure is made up of to live, to give, to owe, and to grow. Now, when we think about time, I love Greek, I love Latin. I don't know why I didn't major in it. I should have, but I'd love to review those things. Most of the time, when we think about time, we think of a Greek word known as chronos. So in other words, that is essentially the marking of time, or chronology, or clock and calendar. These are the things we think of when we think about time. But I would suggest to you that the most important aspect of time would be another Greek word with a different meaning, and that is kairos, spelled with a K, K-A-I-R-O-S, kairos. Now, what is kairos? Kairos speaks to the quality of time. It speaks to time being a gift. It speaks to an opportune moment, or a right season, if you will. And so understanding the difference between marking time and using time, or possessing time and using it as a gift, then that begs the question, what is it time for? So I would ask you, as a financial professional, what is it time for? Or to clients, that's a great question. What is it time for at this point in your life? And this speaks to legacy. So again, we've talked about treasure, we've talked about time, and now what do we use time for? Well, we'll look at this in a moment and see how it should be apportioned as we think about leaving a legacy. But it has to do with, obviously, we could spend it for leisure, we could spend it for work, family, ministry, mentoring. As you can see, those tend to become more important as we go down the list. And then what about talents? So the third aspect of building a legacy, talents. This can have to do with the talents you have in your job. So your vocation. It can have to do with your gifts, or your unique abilities, or your calling. And I've got a definition for calling that I really like. I heard it, and unfortunately, I can't remember who I heard it from. But a calling is defined as talents plus opportunities plus passions equals calling. Rebecca, would you click and put that equation up there so they can see it? Talents plus opportunity plus passion equals a calling. And so I ask you throughout this presentation to maybe consider some of these. Admittedly, the questions get a little deep in terms of philosophy, but that's on purpose, because I'm hoping that you, as a participant on this particular presentation, will think about these things in terms of yourself, and most importantly, or as importantly, pass these on to family, to kids, to grandkids, to clients, to their kids and their grandkids. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But I always love that definition of calling. Let's take a look. We'll look at it here on my slides, the next poll question, and you can just kind of answer this to yourself. So the poll question says, what do those 55 and older want to be remembered for? So just take a look at those 5 options. Looks like we got it coming up here so you can vote. So we'll give you a few seconds to vote on that. What do those 55 and older want to be remembered for? Interesting to see how that's coming in. Oh, all right.
Easy for me to answer after my experience yesterday.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. All right, great. So it looks like 63%, or basically 2/3 almost, are coming in at the top one. Well, let's take a look at the broader results from the survey. You can see it there. Sure enough, A, Memories shared with loved ones, overwhelmingly, is what people over the age of 55 want to be remembered for. And these, of course, are in order: the quality of their marriage, their primary relationship, 41%, passion, interests, hobbies, maybe a little surprisingly down at 17%, career success and wealth accumulation barely register in the big picture when you think about it. Isn't that interesting? Particularly wealth accumulation, when it really all boils down, people aren't that consumed with it, no pun intended, but it's still a big piece of legacy. And it's the one that we've chosen to primarily pour into in terms of our own profession. Very important, but I want to see where we can move beyond the borders of helping with wealth accumulation, career success, and move into some of these other areas that are obviously so important based on the broader survey and even the smaller survey that we just did together. So let's think about relationships. And again, I think you can look at this in terms of generally in terms of from top to bottom, in terms of concentric circles. So you start out with your community, then you move into friends, you move closer to family, you move closest to that significant other in your life, and then the creator, perhaps your spiritual thoughts. When I was an advisor, one of the questions I always loved asking clients of every stripe, didn't matter where they came from geographically, what their wealth was, I would always ask them, what's keeping you up at night, just to get an idea of where they were, whether it was a new client opportunity, perhaps prospect, or even somebody I had as a client for 20 or 30 years. What's keeping you up at night? And because of the location we were in, i.e. a conference room, a financial organization's conference room, they would typically go to a money answer first. Well, I'm worried about the market, the economy, presidential election, what's happening in Europe, whatever it might be. But I only had to ask maybe one more time, now, what else is keeping you up at night? And it typically always came down to simply kids and grandkids, right? Now I realize it can be other things, health issues, things of that nature. But that seemed to always be a thread that ran through the answers to that question. And I always found that very curious. And of course, being the father of 4 children, no grandkids yet, but little children, little problems, big children, big problems. I think maybe some of you can relate to that. Relationships are really where our clients' hearts are. Again, that survey question spoke to that a moment ago. If you go to the next, there, Rebecca, I wanted to show you a picture that means a lot to me. And so I'm not here to really give you my life story or focus on me or my family, but I'm hoping that in showing you this picture that means so much to me, in fact, maybe you can see it just over my left shoulder on the screen. It remains on my prime place on my shelf for as long as I'm around. But this was a day about 10 or 12 years ago when we were in northern France visiting Normandy and the cemetery there near the beaches of Normandy. And these are my 4 children. Obviously, they were younger then. And it's just a fascinating picture because of what they are doing, not because of what I'm doing. But my youngest son is looking down the row there of crosses. He's an Army officer currently, second lieutenant based in Georgia. Always been a real historian on battles in World War II, especially. My oldest son, Jonathan, looking down the other way of the rows of crosses. And then my 2 daughters looking at something has their attention on that particular cross as they're looking at it. And so it's just such a poignant moment. It was such a beautiful day. It was such a meaningful day for me. And that's a picture that in my life really exemplifies and represents what my kids mean to me and what it means to be able to teach them about history and about the sacrifices that have been made. And so, again, I just show you that because I know in your minds right now, as you're listening to this, there is a photograph or a picture or a painting or something of that nature that brings that same kind of emotional meaning to you. And that's why relationships are weighed so heavily, in my opinion, in a legacy consideration. On that note, let's go to the next poll question and talk about, with this poll question, how are we going to pour into the legacy of our children and our grandchildren? Would you take a moment there? What percentage of Fortune 500 CEOs? This was done about 7 or 8 years ago.
Jim, while that they asked the answer to this question, I just wanted to interject for a second and say you shared with us a really important technique as far as starting conversations. We frequently start conversations with other folks, especially in networking events, as we just ask them, what do you do for a living or what industry you're in? And you taught us about lava. So I don't know if you want to just explain really quick what that means, because that's been really important as we create relationships within our firm.
Yeah, absolutely. I will do that. And so let's see the poll results here real quick. So it looks like 25% is the predominant answer there. Well, believe it or not, you'll show the answer. It is 93% of the Fortune 5. They were, I think they interviewed 318 of the 500 at the time of the survey. And over 9 out of 10 felt like in this generation, soft skills were more important than technical skills. And when you think about that, and Celeste, I'm going to come back to lava on that answer, but one other statement here. As I'm teaching kids here kind of on the ground with students in college right now, when I was at the university 40 some odd years ago, we had an opportunity to take courses that spoke to the idea of communication and how we come across to older adults, et cetera. There's so much technical information that has accumulated over the last 40 years that when kids major in accounting, they're taking accounting in their first fall semester. There's not a lot of time for those kinds of courses that teach these skills. So I think that may be one of the reasons, or that we see kind of CEOs of Fortune 500 companies kind of hungry, even starving for that kind of ability in their younger workers. So I found that to be a very interesting question. And so next slide, Celeste, to your point, one of the things that I believe, one of the ways you can leave a legacy is understanding how important these interpersonal communication or soft skills, I like to call them critical skills, as you can see there in parentheses, how important those are. And the lava conversation, I'll give you a little bit more detail on that in a moment, is an example that you brought up of one of those social skills that is so valuable, I believe, in this day of dominant technology. So I have an equation to put up here. It's I plus K times E equals W. Now, I'm not a math guy, so don't be impressed at all with that, because all I'm trying to express here is this idea that I think what CEOs are seeking in those soft skills is they're looking for kids that, I use the phrase wise beyond their years. So if you were to say to me after meeting one of my 4 children, and I get this compliment often and I love it, is they'll say, that kid is wise beyond their years. As a parent, I don't know that I could have a compliment much more meaningful to me than that one when it's said about one of my kids. And by the way, it's not said about all of them all the time, I can assure you. But when we get that kind of compliment, my wife and I are so proud, because it speaks to wisdom. That's really, I think, where there is a hole in our culture in this generation that's being brought up of our kids and our grandkids, of wisdom. And so this attempt at a math equation here, it's simply intelligence, I, plus knowledge, K. And by the way, our intelligence, our intellect is pretty much set for us, if you will, through our DNA and what we inherit and are blessed with or not. But knowledge is something that we can accumulate. So we're controlling the K, if you will, if we're looking at this as math. We add those together and then times experience. So I tell our kids in the classroom, look, what we're trying to do is we're trying to add 10 to 12 years of wisdom to you in this 4 years of college. If we can multiply your wisdom at a faster rate, we call it the speed to trust. In other words, if a young man or woman is wise beyond their years, then when they get into the business world, they're going to be trusted at a more rapid pace. And why are they not trusted? Simply because they don't have the experience. They don't have the chronos, if you'll recall. But what we're trying to do is give them the kairos by giving them a richer experience. In other words, we want that E for experience to be rich in terms of who they surround themselves with, what they're learning, such as the lava technique that Celeste mentioned, which is coming next, but also those mentors that they're surrounding themselves with. Todd mentioned earlier that my latest book is actually called The Mentor. It's a fictional book that talks about these concepts in a story form, so that perhaps it's a little easier to digest by the younger generation. But I love a couple of quick quotes here on the next slide. Really are very meaningful. Wisdom means simply knowing what matters. And I don't know who Brent Hansen is, but I love that definition. Wisdom means knowing what matters. Isn't that a great definition? The next one there is equally good when we think about legacy. Legacy is not leaving something for people, it's leaving something in people. And a gentleman named Peter Strobel said that. So let's now transition into, let's think about our kids and our grandkids. Remember, going back to the conference room, what's keeping up at night, my kids and my grandkids. Well, here's a picture of the mentor and the program on the next slide. The program within it, the fictional professor is teaching a course called The 12 Keys to Professional Success. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. On the next slide, I'll give you a few moments here to kind of take some of this in. Celeste a moment ago mentioned LAVA, L-A-V-A. It's key number one there, building instant rapport. So we ask the kids, and again, I want you to think about this in terms of not only yourself as a technique, you know, even Todd learned a new trick here, right? The old dogs can learn new tricks.
I heard that.
Well, I'm with you there. But anyway, I asked him, I said, if you could build instant rapport with anyone at any time, anywhere, would that be a valuable skill? So I'm asking that to college students, and I'll ask that to you as a manager, as someone running a firm, as someone working with clients who have kids, grandkids, your own. If you could teach them to build instant rapport anywhere, anytime with anyone, would that be a valuable professional skill? Would that be something that would make someone come across wise beyond their years? Would it increase that speed to trust? And of course, that's a rhetorical question as far as I'm concerned. And the answer is yes. So LAVA is simply, just to give you a very quick rundown on it, LAVA is an acronym for locations, associations, vocations, and avocations. So locations, as Celeste mentioned a moment ago, the first question I ever ask anybody, I always ask this as soon as I meet them, I'll ask them, hey, are you from around this area? Good chance they're not. And no matter where they tell me they're from, it doesn't matter, any location, you put a pin on any place in the map on the entire globe, and I will be able to comment on that place. I'm old enough, I've been around long enough to know something about every continent, every town, every state, and I can find something to talk about as soon as they tell me where they're from. Now, I wish we could do this with each one of you who are on the program today, or we'll watch this a little bit later. But I tell you, when you talk about somebody's hometown, where they're from, it brings in nostalgia, it brings in emotion, it brings in good memories. We tend to remember the good things about our past life, not the bad things, you know, generally. And so it allows you to relate to someone literally instantly as soon as you make a comment about where they're from. And then that moves on to their associations. So the A in LAVA is for associations. You can ask about family or friends, or who do you know at this conference, or do you have family back in Fresno if they're from Fresno, for example. And so what this does is it brings in, instead of asking about their vocation, which is the third thing I always ask, instead of creating that possible socioeconomic separation or professional separation or lack of anything in common by saying, hey, what do you do? At the old school, which Todd mentioned earlier, a company that I established, one of our mantras is it's not just what you do, but it's who you are that makes the difference. That's really what I want to know. I want to know who you are. Where are you from? Who do you know? Tell me about your upbringing. And these are not, we're not asking direct personal questions. The technique actually avoids those direct personal questions. But by learning this about someone, you begin to become friends, you begin to relate to each other. Then you can talk about vocations and then avocations, hobbies and things like that, even though they weren't that important on that survey earlier that we looked at. People still love to talk about what they do in their free time and what they do for fun. And so that's an example of one key skill, interpersonal communication skill, that we can teach to today's college student. You can teach to your kids, your grandkids, and now begin to suggest some of these things to clients to build that rapport in your business relationship and or personal relationship. So you can see here, I'm really dwelling on the relationships part of those 4 areas of a legacy. But that's because that's kind of an area where I love to focus and have had some enjoyment doing that. I'll pause here. Todd, if you'd like to make some
can
comment.
I jump in? Because I think of the 12 items here from your book, for this audience, I think that's probably the most important one to take away, the most important one that we've kept in our firm, the idea of a warm, flowing conversation. And I think it's just as important to focus on what you shouldn't ask. You know, we tend to ask, are you married? Do you have children? You know, what do you do for a job? Right. And the danger in that you've explained to us before, but I think it'd be good for the audience to understand why it's important not to ask some of the questions. It's just as important to focus on what you should be asking.
Right. No, and thank you for, I'll bring that out. Just a couple of comments there. You know, I don't ask people where they're from. I ask if they're from around this area, because then they're naturally going to probably tell me where they're from. I suppose there's some places that if you say I'm from that place, it might have some negative connotation. I don't think so. I mean, we really can't help where we're from, but you know, that's kind of the way things are sometimes in our culture. And so you want to try to avoid those kinds of things. I asked, do you have any family back in that hometown, as opposed to saying, are you married? Do you have kids? I mean, you know, there's things that happen in life. They could have lost a spouse to death, or be going through a difficult breakup, or, you know, so you don't want to bring those negative feelings up. So you just ask very, you know, innocuous, open-ended questions. And if they want to go there, you'll go there with them. If they don't want to go there, then, you know, no harm done. And you're still on your way to building some rapport in some way. So yeah, the technique is talked about in more detail in the books that you've offered to give away there, the Old School Advantage. And so I won't dwell on it too much, but thank you for those comments. I would also throw in, obviously I love them all because I wrote about them, but if I'm thinking about the very most important of those, I would say words that wow. The words they use really tell the story about who they are in terms of their maturity. Make sure they understand they're always interviewing. There's some funny words there on number 8, indefatigable connectedness. That's really talking about how to connect and how to communicate. And one of the highlights of that is the handwritten note, the art of the handwritten note, asking great questions. And then number 12, lifelong learning. So let's take 8 and 12. I've always told my clients, and I tell the students now, if they will send one handwritten note every workday for the rest of their lives, they cannot fail. So that means they can take off Saturday and Sunday if they want. If they'll write one a day, they absolutely cannot fail in life. And number 12, if they'll read one book a month that they're not required to read, nobody's making them read it, and they can pick the genre, one book a month, they're going to have a hard time failing. And if they read 2 books a month, they're going to be a C level, or they're going to own their own business one day. That's how important lifelong learning is. Warren Buffett, I mentioned him earlier in a poll question. He reads 500 pages a day. That, you know, that's well beyond my ability there. And I feel like I read a lot. Let's go to the next poll question. How many Americans are step parents, stepchildren, or part of some type of blended family? What do you think? Well, we're showing you, we got again, a pretty bright audience here today. They're right on it and showing the answer there. Please, it's 100 million. That's an amazing number when you think about it. It's almost a third of all Americans have had some experience that has put them in this category. I can speak to this a little bit, fortunately or unfortunately. I'm using something bad that happened to our family, and we've made it into a good thing. So the 4 children that you saw there, that's a blended family. The 2 boys are mine from my first marriage. I lost my wife to cancer about 13 years ago when the boys were a little younger than they were there. And then those are my stepdaughters. So a couple of years after my wife passed away, I married her best friend. And it just happens that our 4 children actually grew up together, not knowing that they were going to be siblings, but we've got pictures of them when they're 6 months to 4 years old together playing. And so it was really kind of a very unique, and we were blessed to have that opportunity and continue to be so. But there are unique issues in step families, you know, and this is where I kind of bring C3 in, because they've taught me some things over the years about how they do planning for step families. So if we're thinking about relationships and how we build those and how we pour into those, I think we have to look at this, because 1 out of 3 of your clients and or in your family, perhaps you yourself, are affected by things that happen throughout our lives that create relationships that are a little more difficult. On the next slide,
Jim, I would just add that,
yeah, go ahead.
from our experience, we see often, the tools and techniques that we as advisor use, the trust, the partnerships, the gift of closely held business stock, that you now have these relationships that are just not family, but they're also tied with financial assets. And so when I'm thinking about what you called those soft skills, that I really like your word critical, I mean, they're just exponentially, when you've got so many different boundaries that are being crossed. And sometimes perhaps there were good intentions in creating all those entities, but the education of how to live inside those entities was probably not the time spent on it that families could have benefited from.
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent comments. And in fact, I want to speak to what you just said on our next slide. You can see there's a term that I heard a while back, and I've used it a lot. It's when it comes to our children, whether it's stepchildren or not, natural children, it's this idea of treating them equally. I think that's kind of a Western idea, maybe an American idea, treating them equally. But I add equally, but uniquely. And so if you think of that, equally, uniquely. All right, so financially, we think, all right, if we're giving them $1 million, they each get $250,000, just to use simple math. Well, maybe. I mean, they have, when you think about some of the things that are out there, the next item here, and maybe an inheritance from grandparents. Well, guess what? The grandparents, my boys have different grandparents than my girls. And I call them my girls, even though they're technically, my stepdaughters. I just call them my girls. We don't ever use the word step, but there's nothing wrong with using it, just to identify that relationship. But that becomes an issue. The grandparents, aren't obligated to obviously treat everyone the same, but they can treat them uniquely. The next one, I think you alluded to this one, Carolyn, businesses versus cash. So, there are a couple of my 4 kids who have an interest in what I'm doing for a living. The other 2 will never be involved in anything that I do on, on the financial side of things. So, how does that work? How do you deal with that? Recreational real estate. I bring
Oh,
this
that's a
one.
big one, Jim.
Yeah, well, we've got a wonderful ranch out home out in Bonham, Texas, and I live further away now, so I don't get up there as much, although I'm leaving in about 3 hours to go there for the big game in Dallas this weekend. But we've had that issue. What do we, when we're no longer here? I mean, that was something that my boys and I owned, and it was kind of in honor of their mother that we bought it and built it. Well, obviously we want, our new family to use that, but what happens to it? How's it disposed of? I hate to use that word, but you know what I'm talking about. And then insurance. I mean, how can we use insurance? I call it the great equalizer. And I know that you know this better than I do, that there are gaps that can be filled. There are, we can bring more equality and or treat our kids. And, I think what it does is it gives us the freedom to make some decisions that will help them. In fact, I learned from Celeste recently, and I hadn't even thought about this. It makes perfect sense, but sometimes families break up with divorces and there's a divorce decree and all this kind of thing. Well, there's for example, there's specialty financial instruments such as disability insurance of the father that is paying support for children, stepchildren. There's just so many tools that can be used from a financial point of view. Insurance to me is always, I started in that industry almost 4 decades ago, and it's always been just so it's a miracle. Whoever invented it back in England with the ships and the underwriting, it's just an amazing thing, and it comes into play here with the work that y'all do so well.
Jim, appreciate it. That's a good point to pause for just a second and remind everybody that if they have a question for you, we'll have a few minutes at the end to either put that in the Q&A or the chat room, and we'll try to allow a few minutes at the end to address those questions.
Right. Thank you, Todd. And so we are on the home stretch. The video was talking about a relay race earlier, and I hope you'll be able to maybe send that video out to the participants that we had that little tech issue, but
we definitely will.
As we head down the home stretch here, I'd like to talk about, and I love this, it's from a book called Lighting the Torch. And I've changed these questions a little bit to kind of fit, this conversation, but I think they're such powerful questions. I want to give them to you. We don't have a lot of time to talk about them. Maybe you have a question about them I can help you with, but I just want you to see these questions for just a moment. So think of these, I call them client super questions. Here's the first one. How would you describe a life that is complete? How would you describe a life that's complete? And think about that yourself. How would you answer that question? Here's the second one. We'll break these down a little bit more in just a second. The doctor's given you 3 to 5 years to live. They're going to be healthy years. Okay, so I guess that's the good part. It's not going to be terrible. What will you do with the time remaining? What will you do with the time remaining? And then the third client super question, the doctor has given you 1 week to live. The question, what would remain undone? Boy, that's a boomerang question. That's a 180 from the other question. So let's break those down. Go to the next slide and see this first one again. How would you describe a life that is complete? So think about this. Whatever answer they give, the answer is going to give a full scope of their dreams and their aspirations. Next, please. There it is. The answer gives a full scope to dreams and aspirations. The way I would put this, I put it there in red, they are going to take inventory of their lives. That is a powerful thing to have a client take inventory of their life. So that's question 1. Let's go to question 2 and unpack that one just for a bit. All right, here it is again. The doctor's giving you 3 to 5 years. It's not going to be too difficult physically. But what will you do with the remaining time, at the time that's remaining? All right, go to the next. The answers go deeper. They revolve around family and other relationships or life dreams that have been postponed or neglected. So you see what's happening here. The first question is outline what your best life looks like. And now we're going deeper and saying, what have you postponed or neglected? If you could click one more time, I think I have one more comment. Yeah, in my own words, this is the second chance question. And then the third question, again, reviewing it, the doctor's giving you 1 week to live. What would remain undone? Answer shows how well the client is living and what truly matters to them. And here's how I would put it. It shows future regrets and a chance to avoid them. Now, we've gone through that quickly, but I can assure you, if you go in the direction of those, again, what I'm calling super question, you are going to have conversations that open up opportunities for you to meet their needs and opportunities for them to leave a much richer legacy because of the things that are going to come out at that point. I'm going to skip the next slide. I just had it in here in case we had time, and let's go to this last quote, and then I'll take some questions. I love this. Who are we, or who we are? We are all the link to the past and to the present and a bridge to the future. Tim Kimmels, I thought, put that very well. Past, present, and future. All right, Todd, I'll be happy to open it up to any questions.
Great. Well, as we're gathering those questions, Jim, you might touch on, I know you do a daily blog that I thoroughly enjoy. This morning, talking about road trips and getting out of a car and things to do to avoid the aches and pains of driving. And after driving in an hour and a half from East Texas this morning, I couldn't help but think of those as I crawled out of the car.
Right.
So you want to share your blog and how people might have access to it if they want to?
Yeah, it's not so much a blog. It's a daily excerpt that I send out. So it's not really my words. I practice what I preach in terms of reading. I'm reading a little bit less right now simply because I'm writing. And so if anybody on the call has ever written a book, you know how all encompassing that can be. But it's really a kind of bringing together excerpts of the many books that I read. And so, as you mentioned, today's was about taking a long trip and the posture you should have when you drive. I'm driving 4.5 hours here a little later today. And so I thought, well, that's a timely one for me. And I thought I would share it. But if anybody would like to be on that, they can certainly, you can give them my email and let them notify me, and I'll put them on that,
Will do.
on that list.
You know, another thought that occurred when I watched your video with the batons was the adage of the comparison to a football player working with a quarterback instead of the receiver.
Right.
We've heard a lot of that. That might be one resonate too with a lot of folks.
Right.
Especially with your football behind you.
That's an Aggie football signed by Jackie Sherrill. It was here. I've got a story about when I just walked in his office unannounced one day, but I'll save that maybe for another time. But yeah, it's, you know, we want to put, you know, as a quarterback of our clients' financial lives, we want to put the ball in the best possible spot where they can catch it. I mean, they may have the skill to catch it if we don't make a good toss, but why not make a perfect one? And hopefully some of these questions we're talking about here today, or maybe pouring into the next generation, their kids, their grandkids, your grandkids, maybe it helps them, you know, turn and run down the field a little further than if they had to reach back for the ball, so to speak. So.
And the extension of the analogy that I've always felt was appropriate was, you know, most coaches, financial coaches otherwise, spend their time working with the quarterback. And if you did that and you ignored the receiver, didn't matter how good that throw was, if the receiver wasn't prepared to catch it and do something with it once he got it or she got it, then it would be all the training with the first generation would be for naught if the others weren't prepared to take it and do something effective with it.
Absolutely. You know, I'll comment on that. The critical skills have the peripheral advantage or epiphenomenal advantage, additional advantage of preparing them for life situations. It's not just a matter of making sure they're using good words or telling good stories or they're reading Those are all transformative activities. All 12 of those keys transform the kids into being better than who they might have been. That's the idea behind it.
Jim, I'm curious, as you go to look at different generations, how have you seen the use of technology, the cell phones, the iPads, enhancing or distracting from the ability to use those critical skills?
You know what's interesting? I love my iPad, and I do all my reading on an iPad because it allows me to highlight in different colors.
Mhm.
So the old school advantage towards the back of that book, when we get in the key about lifelong learning, I have a little code that where different colors mean different things. So if you'd like to use that. So the irony is here, I'm a guy entering my 7th decade of life, and I love that reading technology. However, my students who are 19 to 22 that I see on Tuesday and Thursday, they do not like reading on electronic devices at all. When I tell them, when I hand out the mentor at the first of the semester and say, they all want the hard copy. Nobody opts for the digital copy. And that's because I feel like they have become so inundated and so distracted that when they read, they want to be able to concentrate. And if they do it on their device, they can't. Now I have the self-discipline to forget about the texts and the emails while I'm reading on my iPad. They maybe do not. So that's a little bit of an ironic twist that maybe is unexpected. And I asked my publisher a few years ago when digital books were becoming so popular, she had told me that about 49% of all books were digital. 2 years later, I asked her again, expecting that number to go up. And she told me instead, it was down to about 24%. So it had gone in the opposite direction. In other words, the public had voted. They had tried digital books and they were going back to hard copy. That's not my opinion, but that's what's happening. So it's good for those of us that are selling hard copies, I guess.
Yeah. As we're winding down, Rebecca, do we have any questions that have come in?
We do. We have a couple. The first is, what are the most important skills to pass on to your kids or grandkids?
Yeah, the lifelong learning, definitely. The warm-up conversation, by the way, I called it LAVA, L-A-V-A, because the idea is to warm up a conversation and get it flowing. I think storytelling is a lost art. So if you can give your kids and grandkids the building blocks of the words and the asking great questions, and then storytelling, those 3 connected skills. If you can communicate, you can do anything. Doesn't matter what your degree is, doesn't matter. Those CEOs of those Fortune 500 companies are screaming for people that can communicate without using the word like 3 times in every sentence. And I know that's a little harsh, but that's the reality of it.
We have one more. Could you recommend some books for clients?
Oh, in fact, I can.
Besides the mentor.
Yes, the Old School Advantage and the mentor. You know what I did, Todd? I sent Rebecca, we had a client book club when I had a practice, and it extended for a while as I was consulting. There's about 100 books on that, that slide that I sent to her. In fact, I don't know, Rebecca, if you can put it up or if you just want to send it out. And I put a check mark above, a red check mark above those that I believe pour into this topic of leaving a legacy. All right. Yes, 2 of those are my 2 books, but that's what I wrote them for, and you can be the judge if they're good or not. However, there are a lot of books that are checked that I know are good, and you don't have to speculate on whether they're good or not. So that would be certainly something. And there's several there. There they are. And there's several there. One in particular that I love to pass on to kids and grandkids, if I can find it real quick. Can't remember what year we read it. There it is, The Ultimate Gift in 2016.
Oh yeah.
The Ultimate Gift, that's a great gift to give to.
That actually was turned into a movie. And,
it was. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, great message.
Yes. Anyway, there's a starter kit that'll keep you busy for a while.
That's great. Okay. Well, we will share that. Well, Jim, thanks very much for your time, for your wisdom, your input. As I said, we've benefited over the years and continue to benefit. Carolyn particularly has been good, as I said, going back and reviewing some of the key ideas and images you've given us, concepts you've given us. And so we appreciate those gifts that have keep on giving for us. Our next presentation for Consume and Converse is November 16th. Catherine Sanderson, who's a professor at Amherst, is a researcher, and she talks about the impact of aging, not necessarily physically aging, but I've heard her speak. I've had conversations with her. She's very, very good. She's written a book called The Positive Shift, which we'll have some copies of that as well. But a very, very good and entertaining instructor, as Jim has been for us today again. So with that, we thank everybody for tuning in. And remember, the first 3 that respond after we close the call out will get the book. And unfortunately, does not apply for people who are watching it from a recorded version. But on behalf of Carolyn and Celeste, we thank you again for joining us. You all be careful, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.